Today we're diving into the story of a king you could easily miss if you blink while reading the history books. His name was Ahaziah, king of Judah, and his entire reign, his whole legacy, fits into one single year. But this is way more than just a historical footnote. It's got all the makings of a political thriller, a war story, and a really powerful spiritual warning shot, all wrapped up in one man's very short, very tragic life. Just 1 year. That's all he got on the throne. And you know, that incredible brevity, that tells you right away, we're not just looking at a life here. We're looking at an implosion. Something went catastrophically wrong, and it happened fast. Because this 1 year reign, it wasn't some random accident. It was, as one source so perfectly puts it, the climax of a multi-generational disaster. Think of it like a long, reckless family joyride that was always going to end in a horrible crash. Ahaziah was the guy standing right at the intersection when these two powerful, destructive family legacies finally collided, and he just got crushed between them.
So to really get why his end was so disastrous, we've got to look at his beginning, which was just as chaotic. He only got the throne in the first place because he was, quite literally, the last man standing. You see, in a normal, stable kingdom, Ahaziah, being the youngest son, probably would have lived a pretty quiet life of luxury. But his world was anything but stable. He wasn't the firstborn, he wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the most prepared to be king. No, he became king for one simple reason. He was the only one left. And why was he the only one left? Well, because his kingdom was in absolute chaos. This wasn't some peaceful succession of power, it was a bloodbath. Invading Arabs had pulled off what was basically a decapitation strike. They wiped out all of his older brothers. The whole royal cabinet, gone, kidnapped and killed. And just to paint the full picture of this family's dysfunction, his own father, Jehoram, had already murdered his own brothers, Ahaziah's uncles, because he saw them as rivals. So at just 22 years old, Ahaziah inherits the throne by default. Now, whenever a young, inexperienced ruler takes power in a vacuum like that, you can bet someone is going to step in to fill it. And in this case, that person was his mother, Athaliah. She became his chief advisor, or as the text says, his counselor to do wickedly. To understand his mother, you have to understand her family's brand. The Bible goes out of its way to connect her to her grandfather, Omri. Now, the House of Omri, they were a political and religious titan up in the northern kingdom of Israel. They were known for raw power, for massive wealth, and for making the worship of the idol Baal the state religion. They were basically everything the kingdom of Judah was supposed to stand against. And this chart, wow, it just lays out that toxic chain of influence perfectly, doesn't it? You can trace it like a poison ivy vine. It starts with the ideology of the House of Omri, it flows through the infamous King Ahab to his daughter, Queen Athaliah. And then she injects that same poison directly into the heart of Judah by counseling her son, King Ahaziah. The line between the two kingdoms had basically been erased. In fact, the book of 2 Chronicles gives us this absolutely chilling summary. It says, "For his mother was his counselor to do wickedly." This wasn't just, a mother giving some bad advice. The text implies she was his chief of staff for evil. She was shaping his policies, pulling the strings, and dragging him deeper and deeper into her own family's doomed legacy. And it's her counsel that leads him directly to the decision that seals his fate. It's a decision to take what would ultimately become a fatal road trip. So here's the crucial moment. Ahaziah makes a military alliance with his uncle, King Jehoram of Israel, to go fight against Syria. Now, if you're looking at it from a purely political view, hey, it's a smart move. It's Realpolitik 101. But from a spiritual view, it was a fatal alignment. He was literally standing shoulder to shoulder with a dynasty that God had already put on notice for total destruction. So the battle against Syria doesn't go great, and King Jehoram gets wounded. He retreats to a city called Jezreel to recover. Now, Ahaziah, he's safe back in Jerusalem. He could have just stayed home. He didn't have to go. But he makes a choice. He decides to go visit his uncle in person. And in doing so, he walks directly onto the divine firing range just as target practice is about to begin. And that brings us to the climax of this whole story, the judgment at Jezreel. The trap is now set, the bait is taken, and the instrument of God's judgment is on his way. Imagine this. A watchman on the city tower sees a cloud of dust in the distance. He can't quite make out who it is, but he recognizes this style. The famous line from 2 Kings is just electric.
The driving is like the driving of Jehu, for he drives furiously. This guy is driving like an absolute madman, and you can just feel the tension building with every single turn of his chariot wheels. The two kings, Joram and Ahaziah, they ride out to meet this approaching chariot, completely clueless about the danger they're in. They probably think he's bringing news from the war front. So King Joram calls out the fateful question, "Is it peace, Jehu?" And Jehu's response? It's one of the coldest, most direct lines in the entire Bible. There's no negotiation. There's no warning. Just this chilling reply, "What peace can there be so long as the harlotries and sorceries of your mother Jezebel are so many?" And with those words, the trap is sprung. The time for talking is over. The execution is just swift and brutal. Jehu pulls back his bow and kills King Joram instantly. Ahaziah sees it, panics, and takes off. But Jehu just shouts, "Shoot him too," and they do. Ahaziah is wounded, but he manages to escape to the fortress of Megiddo, only to die there. Not in some heroic battle, but as collateral damage in the total wipeout of another nation's corrupt dynasty.
So, what do we do with this tragic one-year reign? I mean, what's the takeaway from this incredibly brutal story? Well, let's unpack its lifetime of lessons.
The first big lesson is about being guilty by association. Ahaziah wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was there because he had chosen his side. He had made himself an honorary member of this corrupt house. To put it in modern terms, he was wearing the jersey of the opposing team when judgment finally came for them. And the core takeaway, the big idea, is captured in the simple but really profound metaphor. If you stand on the tracks with a train, you get hit by the train. It's about the inevitable consequences of aligning yourself with a system, an ideology, a family that is headed for destruction. You don't get a pass just because you thought it was a smart political move. In the end, Ahaziah's story isn't just about ancient history. It's a mirror. It forces us to look at our own alliances, our own pragmatic choices. And it leaves every single one of us with a timeless and deeply personal question. When judgment comes, who are you standing with?